Welcome. So first, I'll repeat the gratitude for everyone turning out. We're very privileged in two ways. First, the privilege of hosting the speakers that we have here. I'll introduce in just a moment, but also everyone joining us on a rainy Thursday. Thank you for coming down. It is my great privilege to host a discussion between three industry heavyweights, all of whom are doing probably the hardest thing to do in digital advertising, which is drag us forwards and take us to a better place and disrupt a status quo, which I think nobody is particularly delighted with. We will talk about the provocations. I think first I'll just kick us off with a quick introduction. So, Tanwa, we're lucky to have you. Seriously, very few people in the industry have empathy for what it's like to be inside brand marketing, inside the agency, inside the publisher, and now building solutions as Chief Strategy Officer for Lumen. Thank you for joining us. Marc, similarly, as the co-founder, CEO of Adelaide, another heavyweight in the industry who has consistently been developing solutions to improve how we measure, think about, and improve on media effectiveness and beyond. Thank you for joining us. And Alex, really one of the OGs of the digital advertising industry, brings a global view to the discussion as well, in leadership roles really around the world in the biggest names in the industry that you're all familiar with, including names like Yahoo, Unruly, and now Executive VP at Amplified Intelligence. If I could have a quick round of applause again for our panelists here. So we had some fantastic provocations. We'll get to those. But first, I think it's important for you all to address, maybe Tan, you could kick us off, and just why are we here talking about attention? Where are we trying to go from, and where are we trying to get to?
I think the key thing to almost start off with is we're trying to move forward. And I think we shouldn't just be too hard on ourselves and expect all the answers today. And I think that's the key. We're all still learning. But we know there's an improvement and a step forward in the right direction. And it brings all key stakeholders together. So we know media is fragmented. We know how we work is too siloed as an industry, and we suddenly have something that everyone can get value from in order to actually look at business objectives and moving the dial forward.
Absolutely, thank you. And Marc, when we think of what we're trading on today at large, despite the chatter, what's wrong with what's really happening under the hood today?
Let's see. So what's wrong with really what's happening today is high-quality publishers can't command a price which is commensurate with the value they're offering to the industry. So the metrics that people are using today, just like raw impressions or viewability, create the wrong incentives for small ads on big screens, basically driving low attention. So I think that getting a shared understanding of what quality actually means is super important, to get us out of this, what's essentially becoming a lemon market, into a place where we can reward high-quality publishers for creating high-quality advertising opportunities, and then we can also give advertisers the justification to pay more for those environments.
Yeah, when we think about transacting on essentially still today a display impression and viewability as a filter, which is essentially where 90% of it is today, Alex, what's the essential next step forwards from there?
Well, I think that the next step forward is we have to complement what's already in place and what systems and measures that our clients, the brands and agencies are working with. So attention is another dimension that complements that and fills some of the gaps and helps colour in what is the format that works, what is the format on what platform, on what page, on what domain, what subdomain that works, so that we're really helping to drive media efficiency, because that's ultimately how we move forwards, to Tanwa's point. If we want to move forward, we have to show brands, we have to show agencies how we can help, or attention can help, filling those gaps and help drive media efficiency.
You mentioned a few elements there. Could you expand on the definition and some of the attributes that you think are essential for us understanding attention in your eyes?
Well, the attention at its basic format is how long does a consumer look at your ad? Ultimately, all marketers want consumers to look at their ads. That's how they derive actions. So in order to increase your media efficiency, you have to look at how you can put the research in and go into the propagation panel. How do you help strategists understand what format, on what platform, on what time or what given day actually holds attention? And how long do they hold that attention for? Because that's what's going to drive your media efficiency. Once you've improved your media efficiency, then you're looking at driving a set of outcomes. So it's again, to Tanwa's point and to Marc's, it's a step process, and we have to be able to help you guys fill in those gaps. Once we've filled in those gaps, it complements the systems you've already got, and therefore you can make better informed decisions to drive that level of efficiency.
And Marc, what do you think to that?
So we've been doing this for about 9 years. The founding team at Adelaide started a company called Parsec about 9 years ago, where we were selling media on a cost per second. It worked really well. Like, we saw much lower costs per incremental outcome than our competitors. But when we started doing a lot of optimization, things started to go a little pear-shaped. And I think it's really important to highlight this, because we've heard several people today talk about attention as duration, or like how long somebody's looking at the ad. And that's sort of like, it's a very simplistic but obvious first step. I don't want to say it's stupid, but it's just like, it's naive, because the amount of time that somebody spends looking at an ad is an outcome in and of itself, right? And that's what we found at Parsec, was when we started to optimize the maximum amount of attention, we were having these sort of unexpected effects on audience and on creative. Like, the creative that we were incentivized to run was the creative that captured the most attention, and not the creative that drove the most impact, right? And the audience stuff got really weird. And Facebook's just come out with some really interesting research about this, showing that older people pay more attention to ads than younger people. There's research showing that intoxicated people take 33% longer to read things than sober people. There's a lot of research that shows that people that are already aware of your brand will pay more attention to your ads than people that aren't aware of your brand. So it's really, really important to not optimize the maximum amount of attention on an impression level or on a campaign level, because you're going to get old drunk people. And now they might convert, right? Like, they might buy stuff, but that's not really what you want your brand to do. So, but that's an obvious first step in attention. I don't blame you guys for talking about duration, but at Adelaide, the insight that we have is that media's job is to create an opportunity for attention. So if you want to judge the quality of an opportunity, you think about probability. And so what we do is we measure the probability of attention by any person to any creative in a placement. And it creates a static score on the placement, which you can use to understand media quality. And when I talk to brands about this, that's what they're after. Brands are after like a better understanding of media quality and an easy way to use that to drive better outcomes. So I think it's really important to move this conversation away from how can we drive the most amount of attention to ads, to how can we create the highest probability of attention by any person to ads.
And surely you want to drive it to where people are looking, to where the consumers are paying attention.
Yeah, totally.
Just because you scored something highly doesn't mean to say a consumer's looking at it.
It's a probability they look at it.
But that doesn't drive the equation, does it? The truest and formest and most accurate part is humans are looking at ads in certain formats at certain times, and therefore that creates the probability. And that's where attention companies are driving the efficiency to help agencies, not, I'm going to give it a score.
Yeah, but everybody here has a metric, and your metric is duration or attention time or attention seconds, whatever it is. When you create a metric, it's your responsibility to think about the incentives that it creates. And when your metric is the duration of attention, everybody's going to look at that and be like, I need to make it go up and to the right. Like that I need to make more of that. And when you optimize your campaigns towards more duration, you just get old people. We found this at Parsec.
This also leans into one of the provocations, which is drill anything down to a metric. Do we have the gamification issue again, or some form of that?
Okay.
So Tan, what do you think to that?
I think that's one of the key things. Lots of people talk about meaningful media and wanting to do all of that. And what we really can't get away from is that making attention a meaningless currency and metric. And that's really key. And so when we talk about optimization, it isn't just a number that everyone should be aiming at. So it really is about the KPIs and the objectives. And really, it's going to be unique to every single client based on their starting point and where they want to get to. So if I could just stress that we shouldn't all be aiming for gold standard, because what that gold standard looks like is going to always be very different. The key thing is to get the optimal amount of attention, but what that optimal looks like will be very different.
Yeah, we were quite lucky to hear from agency heavyweights in advance, not just on the panel here, but also beforehand. And one of the topics raised was there isn't standardization yet. There isn't enough consistency yet in the definition of attention for us to go all in. But it sounds like you're hinting at, well, standardization might not be a good thing. Marc, I know this is something you touched on in advance as well. What do you think to that?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to get to currency. The first way is by fiat or mandate, and that's like, if the IAB says 50% for 1 second, I don't think that's a great way for markets to get to currencies. I think a much more stable way with a lot more longevity is via arbitrage. So you give the buy-side data, they use that data to arb. As the value or the alpha from the arb compresses and price approaches value, then they start to go, buyers go to sellers and say, hey, will you guarantee me the thing that I'm buying using this new metric? And that's like a more market-driven, arbitrage-driven way to get to a currency. That's the approach that we're taking, and I think it's a much more sort of effective way to do it.
Alex, what do you think to that?
I think that's fine. I think ultimately the market's going to decide whether attention becomes a dimension that they add on to their existing processes and procedures to formulate their own ideas and their own way of driving that efficiency. Or the market could go and say, hey, we're going to drive towards the station of currency and we're going to try and arbitrage on attention seconds in that way. Time will tell. I think it's too early at the moment. I think at the moment there is enough room for attention to play with MMM modeling nicely, to play with reach and frequency modeling nicely, to talk about how you can have attention adjusted reach curves so that you know exactly how many humans you're looking to target or going to reach with your attention optimized media schedule. So you have your original schedule, you have your new schedule. And I think that it's a case of the brands and the agencies will decide what's going to help them most going forwards.
And I think there are a couple of things that can be standardized or that are differentials, because it's almost where your starting point is and what you mean by attention and how you capture that. So, for example, human eyes is really, really important to us. And it's really important to, there are probably about 4 of us that sit in that group, I would say. And I think that's a key thing for people to think about, actually. How important do you see that? We absolutely see that as critical, because that is the difference. It's actually what people are genuinely looking at rather than just jumping to a model.
One of the questions that comes up from time to time there is how effective can panels and predictive models be, given we can't measure that every single time?
Yeah, well, that's a really good point, because any predictive model should be trained on outcomes, right? Like the dependent variable in any metric that you make for advertising should be outcomes. It shouldn't be how much attention, right? So you don't want to try to predict how much attention someone's going to pay. You want to start to look at what are the signals that are predictive of attention, and then use those to build algorithms that actually predict outcomes. And the currency conversation, I just want to go back to that for a second. It's very important that we do not use duration of gaze or duration of attention as a currency. There is no premium publisher on the planet who will take responsibility for the quality of creative. The quality of creative is really what drives the amount of attention that people pay to ads, and that it will fail as a currency if we lean too hard on duration.
We have some of the world's leading, most trusted editorial publishers in the room, so it's a good segue into us thinking about what is the impact on publishers as we go further down the path, Alex, on the topic of attention.
I think we're going to see increasingly publishers will use attention as a way of providing an extra pricing metric to their inventory. To some extent, I agree with Marc. There will be publishers who have formats on certain subdomains, domains, or in certain environments, certain cinemas, certain outdoor placements, that will drive more attention and therefore unequivocally the consumer will have a greater propensity to follow up and create an outcome. But in reality, it's got to be done in conjunction with what is that agency and brand trying to achieve at that time? How does attention complement that by adding that extra dimension of, it's no good just relying on proxy data. If you just rely on impression level data, what's training that data? What's making that data honest? Ground truth data, which anybody who's involved in data analytics and data science will understand, it's the most accurate data you can get. Well, that accuracy comes from retinal gaze tracking, right? That's the only way you're going to understand what is an ad doing for a brand, what is a format doing for the publisher. So when a publisher understands how their formats are performing, they are then able to operate by creating whatever they wish to do, an extra dimension, a private marketplace of attention, high attention units or formats by a certain number of seconds. So it makes it easier for the programmatic side to come in and say, hey, I want to buy a PMP that is going to give me an extra 2.5 seconds of attention. That's where I think we're going to see the market driving to.
That's just going to be old people.
What's your obsession with old people?
Well, my obsession is in making metrics that create like thoughtful outcomes, right?
But you're not. You're using proxy data that nobody's looking at, young, old, or indifferent.
No. We licensed all the eye tracking data. We're probably the biggest licensor of eye tracking data in the world. We've licensed before
Before you guys. That's not true.
Not true. That is so not true.
Sorry, before you guys read the comment, we licensed all of your
The
data.
data you paid for.
Well, we'll give Marc a moment to finish the point, and then we'll come back around.
We have all of your data. We have your data before you guys joined, before you guys were doing measurement. You were just doing eye tracking. We licensed all of your data. We licensed data from TVision, from Toby. We license as much eye tracking data as we can get our hands on, but it's the outcomes that matter. Like you can have all of the attention in the world, and if it doesn't drive an outcome, who cares?
Tan.
Okay. I don't think anyone's really questioning that we've got to look at outcomes. I think that's a given, and that's a hygiene factor, and that's like, there's no argument there. I now don't even know what question I'm answering.
Absolutely. Very fair.
My attention's gone somewhere else.
When we think about outcomes, and if we go beyond duration in view, and when you think of your experience as a brand marketer as well yourself, what are the other elements that we should be looking to measure and add to models to bridge the gap between in view to an outcome?
Do you know what? There's so many factors that you should think about. And again, without sort of giving a definitive list, I would say the other element which makes attention so exciting is the piece about, actually, it's not just a measurement that looks at digital. So you can look at sort of multi-platform, you can look at actually absolutely everything within your media marketing mix. But in addition to that, the creative piece. And I think that's one of the key elements that shouldn't be forgotten, because it doesn't matter how well you buy your media if your creative's not right for that particular platform as well. And so it's giving people a tangible proof point to be able to have that discussion at the table and not just think something's not working because of something else. And I think that's really key, sort of bringing all those factors. We also look at, I think one of the guys from the agency, but that also really excites me, the fact that it's a metric that planners and strategists are really excited by, or at least interested in, and it's not just something that stops at the buying table and then you get that disconnect between a strategic thought and vision and everyone isn't on the same page. So I think that's also really important. We also actually, in answering one of the other questions, we look at stuff above the line, below the line, and you can do that with the human eyes methodology of attention. So we've looked at, PR, and actually what does that do? And you can look at that within the mix of everything, so it's not as siloed. And I think that's really important.
Great. So, Alex, one of the provocations was actually that outcomes question, which is, do we have evidence that taking an attention-based approach to measurement and optimization in any form will actually deliver me better business outcomes for my advertiser? What do you think to that?
I think we're still at early stages on that, but you'd be foolish not to think that if you get consumers to pay more attention to your messaging and therefore drive a response on that messaging, outcomes are not going to be positively affected. If you look at models like MRC, where they state that an attention optimized campaign is 30 to 40%, 3 to 5 times better in performance than it was if you just do a viewability campaign. So there's no doubt, to Tan's point and to Marc's point, outcomes are going to be affected by attention, but you have to put the right building blocks in place to maximize the effect of that attention. And that needs to sit alongside the current models that agencies and brands are using and understanding and being familiar with in order to understand how they can improve the efficiency. Because it's all about, is my media working at an optimum level for me? And if it is, it's which ones are working at an optimal level for me. Dr. Graziano said, 50% we don't know. Yeah, we don't. But what attention will do will help identify which is the 50% that is, and then hone in on that is within that 50%, what's driving the best efficiency.
So, yeah, can we get excited about the move towards outcomes in this space then, Marc?
Yeah, I think I've made that point. So the outcomes,
only from old people, all right?
I don't know, man. Yes, if you use your metric, you're just going to get old people. Yeah. So here's the thing. The really cool part with creative and media and attention is that you can start to hold constant the quality of your media and drive more insights around the quality of creative. I don't think you should optimize to the creative that captures the most attention. That creates some really weird biases. But when you can start to really hold constant media, you'll get lots more insights into like what creative is good and what creative is bad, and what impact is actually coming from creative and what's coming from media.
But in that media, it has format size. There are different sizes. You need to work on the one that works, not on just a media in general at that top level.
Yes.
Keep an eye on time. Unfortunately, we've only got a couple of minutes left. I think we've got quite a lot of alignment in the room in terms of a desire, and up here in terms of practical usefulness of where we are already today. So given that you've got peers in the room who agree, we need to move closer to genuine attention engagement in judging the media, the creative, and campaign effectiveness. What's your advice for a practical next better step, Tan, to go first?
Yeah, well, I think, we've had the likes of PwC audit us to show that actually, it does drive outcomes, like we've all said. I think, a number of people have already mentioned the test and learn approach, and that's what I would say. It's like everyone can ask for constant case studies and proof points, etc., but a case study that works for someone else isn't a case study that's necessarily going to work for you. So I would say, actually, if we're all committed to knowing that this is an improvement, you're going to have to put your money out there, and you're going to have to take that step, and you're going to have to test. Test small, learn, because actually it's that learn and that insight for your particular challenge that's going to be the most beneficial. So I would say it's not actually being brave because you can test in a small way, but just take that step forward.
Yeah, we have all of our clients run through an A/B test where they have a cell that's like business as usual and a cell that's AU or attention units. We've seen a pretty much 99% of the time you're able to drive better outcomes with AU than you are with business as usual. So I think there's evidence at the top of the funnel, there's evidence at the bottom of the funnel. We see it very, very consistently. So I would encourage everybody to do that as the first step. Like run a test, understand what the cost of incremental outcomes is when you're using today's metrics versus when you're using attention metrics.
Yeah, I think it's know what your KPIs are, understand what it is you're trying to achieve, have a look at what's available on the market and which is the best solution that will get you close to where you want to be or deliver with what you want from those outcomes and those KPIs, and do some testing. And it doesn't hurt to test with more than one vendor, because ultimately that's how you'll find which vendor works best for which brand or which particular KPIs that you're being targeted on.
Thank you. So I just want to reiterate deep gratitude for the three of you joining us here today. There's no doubt we're in the midst of a really important evolution away from weak metrics in terms of a connection to an outcome and with attention to a significantly better place. So thank you very much. I'd like to offer a round of applause for our guests here today. Thank you very much.
It's such an honor and a privilege to have three of the brightest minds when it comes to attention. I really encourage everybody here to stick around at 4 o'clock and have the conversation with these people. It's a rarity to have them in the same room, and I encourage you to pick their brains and ask the questions that we haven't got time for. Now, moving on. Publishers were mentioned a few times. It's now time to bring on a high-quality publisher and start to understand what they can do to drive incremental attention and to drive higher premiums for their advertising. So with that in mind, please welcome Anthony Crocker and Stephanie Himoff to the stage.